Senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. President, I would ask that the calling of the quorum be suspended.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, next week will mark what would have been the 100th birthday of my predecessor, Senator Claiborn Pell, who was born on November 22nd, 1918. This year, appropriately enough, the date fell on Thanksgiving, or will fall on Thanksgiving. We lost Senator Pell nearly 9 years ago, after a long struggle with Parkinson's disease, which robbed him of his mobility, but not his spirit. He was sustained by the love of his wonderful family, especially his beloved wife, the late Noella Pell. A person who dedicated his life to selfless service to Rhode Island and the nation, Senator Pell would not want a showy commemoration of his centenary. He was not one to seek the limelight. Moreover, for him, his birthday, November 22nd, became a somber day for remembrance and mourning the loss of his dear friend, President John F. Kennedy. But at a time when differences seem more striking than our common cause, and when there is a question of whether America's role in the world community should be guided solely by narrowly defined self-interest or by our democratic ideals, it is helpful for us to recall the example and standard Senator Pell set. Both his accomplishments and the civility he maintained throughout his career. He was born into a family of great wealth and privilege, yet Claiborn Pell never exhibited a sense of entitlement. At a defining moment in the history of our country and a defining moment in his life, Claiborn Pell demonstrated that privilege and wealth was not a way to avoid the rigors of life. Rather, for him, they offered the opportunity and responsibility to meet the challenges of the times with vigor and wisdom and optimism. As World War II approached, Claiborn Pell, with family connections, poor eyesight, and a high draft number, could have easily secured a sinecure, a safe posting, to ride out the war. Instead, before Pearl Harbor, he decided, on his own, to enlist in the Coast Guard and eventually sailed the dangerous North Atlantic convoy runs. Significantly, Claiborn chose to enlist not as an officer, but as a seaman, so he could get a chance at sea duty. The complete lack of regard for status or pretense, which he showed in his World War II service, would continue to mark his public service and endear him to generations of Rhode Islanders. For 36 years, Claiborn Pell did not simply represent Rhode Island in the United States Senate. He represented the ideal of what a public servant should be. He said his motto or statement of purpose was to translate ideas into action and help people. And that is what he did. 100 years after his birth and 58 years after his first election to the Senate, millions of Americans continue to be helped by his ideas translated into action. He believed that government had a critical role in providing opportunity, particularly the opportunity for a good education to every American. And he knew that there were unbounded horizons for the initiative, invention, and innovation of these well-educated sons and daughters of America. Truly, they would continue and enhance the great endeavor that is America. He authored the legislation that established the Basic Education Opportunity Grant, now known as the Pell Grant. Today, roughly 7.5 million students rely on Pell Grants to help pay for college. He wrote the legislation that created the National Endowments for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities. To this day, these agencies support artistic, education, and cultural programming in communities large and small across the nation, fulfilling Senator Pell's commitment to strengthening and preserving our national cultural heritage for all Americans. He led the effort to establish the Institute of Museum and Library Services, helping libraries and museums across the nation transform their communities through access to information and opportunities for lifelong learning. According to the Institute, people visited libraries over 1.3 billion times in 2015, and 55 million student groups visit museums each year. The vision that he articulated in the early 1960s for high-quality passenger rail service connecting the major population centers on the East Coast into a megalopolis led to the creation of Amtrak and the Northeast Corridor. Decades later, it is interesting to see not only how much of his vision has been achieved, but also how much of his vision is now reflected in ideas like Elon Musk's Hyperloop. Touched by the death of 2 members of his staff who were killed by drunk drivers, Senator Pell authored the first federal anti-drunk driving bill in 1976, 4 years before the founding of the advocacy group MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Senator Pell's legislation became the model for federal policy efforts to combat impaired driving by giving the states strong incentives to toughen their laws. Senator Pell was also deeply committed to America's role in securing world peace. His notion of a powerful America leading the world, not standing apart from it, and his notion that our values, our system, and our commitment to human decency would prevail in the face of totalitarianism was wisdom of the ages. In his service on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, he espoused those views, seeking to remind us that our destiny would take us far beyond what simply a military operation or economic power might, because of our ideals and commitment to creating a world community. Senator Pell's approach to legislating was unfailingly kind and civil. In his farewell speech to the Senate, he laid out his guiding rules. In his words, first, never respond to an adversary in ad hominem terms. And in his 6 campaigns for the United States Senate, Claiborn Pell never ran a negative ad or attacked his opponent personally. Rhode Island's rewarded him with an average vote of more than 60% for each of his elections. Second, always let the other fellow have your way. For Senator Pell, winning an ally to achieve a legislative victory was more valuable than getting exclusive credit. Third, sometimes half a loaf can feed an army. He lived by those rules, but he feared that our politics and our media were pulling us in the opposite direction. That is why he used his farewell speech to urge us to stay true to a practice of politics worthy of our democratic tradition, saying, "If I could have one wish for the future of our country in the new millennium, it would be that we would not abandon the traditional norms of behavior that are the underpinning of our democratic system. Comedy and civility, transcending differences of party and ideology, have always been crucial elements in making government an effective and constructive instrument of public will. But in times such as these, when there is fundamental disagreement about the role of government, it is all the more essential that we preserve the spirit of civil discourse." Those words ring very, very true and relevant today, as they did when he gave them in his farewell address. Following in Senator Pell's footsteps, I am one who is in awe of his presence, his accomplishments, and feel a deep responsibility to continuing his legacy. He forged an enduring bond with the people of Rhode Island. He put ideas into action to help people. He was always civil and ready to find common ground. As we celebrate Senator Pell's 100th birthday, let us take inspiration from his spirit of service and collegiality. Let's translate ideas into action and help people. And Mr. President, I know my colleague, Senator Whitehouse, is here, and Senator Whitehouse is someone who knew well Senator Pell and continues in the image and the spirit of Senator Pell by being someone who brings his great talents and skills to serve the people of Rhode Island and the nation with dignity, civility, and great energy. And with that, Mr. President, I would like to yield to my colleague, Senator Whitehouse.